Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we are going to do 2 chapters in 70 Faces. For those who have the book, chapter 55 and chapter 56. We are continuing with a series of how many letters in a word, how many letters in a verse, how many letters in a passage, how many letters in a Torah portion. And tonight we're doing how many words in a verse, how many, but also with letters, and how many words in a passage, and how many words in a Parshah. Those are the 2 chapters we're going to be doing tonight. So for those who have the book, we're starting at page 540. And the first one we're going to do is the first verse in the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim et Shemayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And it's pointed out that there are 7 words in the first verse of the Torah. And this represents the 7 days of creation that are about to unfold. And there's this idea that the whole 7 days, in a sense, is contained in the first day. And the whole first day is contained in the first verse. And the whole first verse is contained in the first word. So here we have all 7 days of creation, in a sense, condensed in pure potential in the first verse of the Torah. Now, the first word of the Torah has 6 letters. And it also, though, has, as one of its permutations, the word Shabbat. In the word Bereshit is Yirah Shabbat, the awe of Shabbat, or the Ya'er Shabbat, the enlightenment of Shabbat. So in the first word, you have 6 letters, but also the hint to the 7th day. And in the first verse, you have the 7 words. So this points out a pattern that repeats itself many, many times in the Torah, the relationship between the numbers 6 and 7. In fact, later on, we have a whole chapter about relationships between 2 different numbers. One of the most important ones is the relationship between 6 and 7. For the simple reason is that there were 6 days of creation, and then the first Shabbat. And that model is repeated throughout all the cycles of the Jewish calendar of history. So we have the 6 years of planting our fields, and then we have the 7th year. This year is a Shemitah year, it's a sabbatical year. So again, we have the relationship between 6 and 7. And then we have the relationship between we'll call it the prophetic calculation that this cycle of history will last for 6,000 years and will be followed by the 7,000th year of Mashiach. So this relationship between 6 and 7 is already encoded in the first word and the first verse of the Torah. So this is just a beautiful understanding of the relationship between 6 and 7 already encoded. The next example is on page 541. And this is the blessing that Yitzhak gave to Yaakov. It's a very complicated story. If everyone remembers, Yitzhak thinks, at least the simple understanding, is very, very complicated and many, many different opinions and ideas. But at least on the simple storyline, he thinks he's blessing Esav, but in fact, he's blessing Yaakov. And like I said, there's many perushim that he actually understood that he was blessing Yaakov. That we're not going to go into right now. The question is, what was the blessing that he gave? And you'll see on page 541 in Hebrew, it's Vayiten lecha ha'elokim mital hashamayim u'shmanei ha'oretz v'rov dagan v'tirosh. So in English, may God give you of the dew of the heavens, the fatness of the earth, and an abundance of grain and wine. So this sounds like a very, very physical, material type of blessing, which is obviously very important, but it's really a spiritual, because the first thing is the dew of the heavens. This is like the first verse of the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens represent all spiritual energy, and the earth represents all material reality. So here, this blessing is blessing Yaakov with the blessings of heaven and the blessings of earth. I heard Rav Ginsburg many times say that this is he used the word highest, like the highest blessing in the entire Torah. This simple, short verse, because it really includes everything. You know, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he used to sign a letter for decades, he would bless everyone with material and spiritual blessings, not one or the other. He would always sign off with a blessing for material and spiritual blessings. So that's really what this blessing is. Now, what's interesting is if you count them, I'm going to do the continuation of the next verse, because the next verse is, in a sense, included in here. And that is, nations shall serve you, and kingdoms shall bow down to you. You shall be a master over your brothers, and your mother's sons shall bow down to you. Those who curse you shall be cursed, and those who bless you shall be blessed. That's the full blessing. What I read before in Hebrew was the first part of it. But we're going to see in a minute the significance of that verse alone. So the tradition is that in these two verses, there are actually 10 different blessings. 10 different blessings. And we can count them. So we'll do it in English. May God give you of the dew of the heavens, that's 1. The fatness of the earth is 2. And abundance of grain is 3. And wine is 4. Nations shall serve you is 5. And kingdoms shall bow down to you is 6. You shall be a master over your brothers is 7. And your mother's sons shall bow down to you, that's 8. Those who curse you shall be cursed, 9. And those who bless you shall be blessed, 10. And some of the commentaries say that these 10 blessings, in a sense, are a forerunner for the 10 commandments. We know that the number 10 is a very archetypal, primary, fundamental number in, of course, mathematics, but throughout Jewish tradition and even halacha, the number 10 appears over and over and over again. And here we see in this blessing 10 different blessings. Now, there's a further understanding which I didn't include here. It might be somewhere else in the book. I can't remember it right now. But the first verse again is Vayiten lecha Elokim mital hashamayim u'shmanei ha'aretz v'rov dagan v'tirosh. And if you look carefully, there are 10 words. That's why we're really learning this. In that blessing, there's 10 words. Now, there is another, call it a custom, but it's actually written in the Shulchan Aruch as a halacha, as an imperative, that when we call it break bread, that especially with a full loaf of bread, or on Shabbat, 2 loaves of bread. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch that you should put all 10 fingers on the bread. You should hold the bread with intent that your 10 fingers are holding the bread. So the reason, he gives a number of reasons, but the 2 that I'll mention here is, the first one is that there are 10 mitzvot from the time that you plant a seed to the time that you actually eat the bread. There's actually 10 different mitzvot. And actually even starts before you plant with a seed, because you have to plow the field. Well, we have a mitzvah that you can't plow a field with a donkey and an ox together, because the ox is much stronger than the donkey, and it would be considered what's called sar bali chaim to the donkey, to make it work as hard as the ox. It's not made for that. And then and then we have, you can't plant the fields with mixed seeds. And without going into all of them, there are 10 mitzvot in the harvesting, in taking the different trumot and maisrot, in taking challah. And so they say you put the 10 fingers. But another reason he brings is this verse right here, because this verse has 10 words. That's why we're learning it in this chapter, because it has 10 words in this verse, and it's considered such a potent blessing for spiritual and material blessing, energy. That's another reason why we put our 10 fingers on the bread. So all of this is learned from the fact that this verse has 10 words. From it, in the 2 verses come 10 blessings. It's connected to the 10 commandments, and it's connected to the whole idea of holding bread with our 10 fingers. The next example is on page 545. Excuse me a second. And this is an amazing one. It's from the Tikkunei Zohar. And the story is that when David fought Goliath, so it says that he had all this heavy armor on him, and he couldn't move. I mean, Goliath was a giant, and David is far from a giant, but they put all this armor on him, and he wasn't used to it. He had no mobility. So David took off all of the armor. This is all written in the book of Shmuel. And it says that he took 5 stones for his slingshot. And I think everyone knows the story. Goliath is standing there and cursing him out and making fun of him. And so it says that, and he had full armor on, but in his head armor, there was a little space between his lower face and his forehead. And it says that David took 1 stone and he flung it at Goliath, and he hit him right in that little space. So I see from the chat, Avram is 1 step ahead of me. So the Tikkunei Zohar says, what's the deeper symbolism of David taking 5 stones and then just slinging one. So the Tikkunei Zohar says that the 5 stones are Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. And what's the one stone? Echad. These are the 5 stones, are the 5 words, the first 5 words of Shema, and the one stone of Echad. So it's an amazing perush, but it's connected to a different explanation that Rashi brings. It says that the Philistines and the Jews, they set up this like contest, that instead of the 2 armies fighting each other, that each one would pick a representative. So of course the Philistines picked Goliath. His reputation was incredible as a warrior. And in a sense, the Jews were procrastinating who is going to fight Goliath. And whoever wins, wins the war, wins the territory. So in the end, no one was really up to it. And David comes and he volunteers. But it says that the whole process took 40 days. Why 40 days? And so Rashi brings this, is that's connected the 40 days that Moshe was in Har Sinai. And it says that Goliath came out every morning and every evening and stood in the field and cursed, God forbid, but he cursed God, he cursed the Jews. And Rashi says, when did he come? Why the morning and the evening? So Rashi says he came when he knew that the Jews would be reciting the Shema, the morning Shema and the evening Shema. And so he came in the morning and the evening to mibalbel, to confuse the Jews, to make them fearful, and maybe forget to say the Shema, or not have full intent when saying the Shema. So that's very, very connected to this idea of the Tikkunei Zohar, that says that that's the meaning of the 5 stones, because Goliath was trying to confuse or interrupt Jews from saying the Shema, and David with the Shema, with the 5 words of the Shema, which are represented by the 5 stones. And of course, the one stone is, in a sense, he put them together, and the one stone represented Echad. So I always found that just an amazing connection that the Tikkunei Zohar makes. But again, it's based on how many words in the verse Shema. That's our chapter. How many words in a verse? So the next example is also, this is one of my absolute favorites. And I personally use this every year during Hanukkah. So when we say the blessing, in the first night of Hanukkah, we say 3 blessings. And the other nights, we say 2 blessings. And the first one is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. And for generations, the way we said it was Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah. And that's how Ashkenazim still say it. So if you look, though, there's 14 words in that blessing, if you count them. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. The Arizal came and he took the word shel out of the blessing. And he would end the blessing lahadlik ner Chanukah without the word shel. And that made it 13 words. Along with that, it made that the Roshei Tevot, the acronym, the three letters of the last three words, if you take out the word shel, not in order, but lahadlik is lamed, ner is nun, Chanukah is chet. If you permute them differently, it spells nachal, which is a stream. So why did the Arizal do this? So he explains that when there are only 13 words, it corresponds to the 13 midot of rachamim. And when you take out the word shel, the three first letters of the words lahadlik ner Chanukah spell nachal. So he said like this. He said when you light Hanukkah candles, you should imagine, you should visualize that here we're lighting from below. The flame goes up. But what we're doing is we're drawing down a stream of light. And a person should imagine as if they're standing in a waterfall of pure light. So when I learned this, it was like, wow, what a beautiful visualization. What a beautiful visual. We light the lights from below. This is called the awakening from below. And it draws down this infinite light from above. We learned a couple of chapters ago that the numerical value of light, or, is the same as Ein Sof, same as infinite, the infinite one. And so we're lighting a physical light from below, but we're drawing down an infinite light, in a sense, into those candles. And so this is all, it also the Ari, in a much more complicated kavana, says that we should also imagine that the stream of light is also a stream of the 13 midot of rachamim, the 13 aspects of compassion. So it's actually a very simple kavana intent, but it's like so powerful. I bless all of us to remember it this coming Hanukkah and to think of it. Now, it doesn't mean that Ashkenazim who keep the word shel can't have that kavana. But the Arizal, and that's why all Hasidim don't use the word shel. It's lahadlik ner Hanukkah, to emphasize this idea of a stream of light. Also, the 8th midat harachamim is notzer chesed la'alafim. God who bestows chesed on thousands. In other words, God's blessings are for the multitudes. And the Roshei Tevot, the acronym of Notzer Chesed Alafim, is also Nachal. It's one of the reasons that the Ari made this chain, because it's also the word stream, a stream of light. So this is a beautiful kavana, but again, it's based on the Ari wanting that blessing to have 13 words and not 14. So this fits into our chapter very well. The last one we'll do is on page 543. And this is a very, very interesting one. Many people will recognize this, that in the book of Bamidbar, in the Parshah Bahalotcha, there's a one-time phenomenon of two inverse nuns bracketing off two verses. It does not appear anyplace else in the Torah. It's what we would call a parenthesis, but it's by backwards, upside down nuns. And so, of course, everyone is wondering. In fact, right in one of the first chapters in this book, we dealt with different forms of letters that usually appear in one form, but in another place, it will be a different form. What can we learn from that? So this is one of them. We might have even learned this. So here, there are many different explanations. Why is this bracketed off? There's no other precedent for this. So one of the opinions is it's to tell us that these two verses are not appearing in their chronological order. If you remember, we had a whole chapter about different parts of the Torah, which is called Ein Mukdam V'Muchar B'Torah. There's no chronological order to the Torah. It doesn't mean there is none, but there are places in the Torah that are not written in chronological order. In other words, they're placed there for a certain reason, and it's not in the storyline, the chronological storyline. So some people say that's why this is bracketed, but the rebuttal is, well, there's many passages in the Torah that are not in chronological order, and we don't have these brackets. Another explanation is that it comes between two different, I call it misdeeds, that Israel did in the desert. So, okay, that's an opinion. Another opinion, though, is that, again, Avram is like one step ahead of me tonight, is the opinion is that these bracketed two verses form a book of the Torah by itself. So this is an amazing, amazing idea, meaning that the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers, is actually three books. What comes from the beginning of the book till the brackets is one book. What comes after the brackets is another book. And these two brackets are considered a book of the Torah in of itself. So that would turn what we call the Chumash, comes from the word five, the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, into 7 books. And that's why it's bracketed off. Now, how does this fit into our chapter tonight? How many words in a verse? So the Baal HaTurim brings even another example to try to show this idea that it's considered a book in itself. And this has actually halachic ramifications because there are 87 letters in these 2 verses. And there's a whole question if a Sefer Torah is burned or it got water on it and the ink bled. What's the minimum of a good part or on a page? Because the pages of a Torah are sewed together. What's the minimum of good part of the writing that has to be there in order to fix it? And they say 87 because there are 87 letters in these verses. But the Baal HaTurim, that's what we're discussing it here. The Baal HaTurim says something a little bit different. He says that the first verse of these 2 verses, and by the way, so everyone knows that these are the verses that we say when we take out the Torah publicly to read it and when we return it. In Hebrew, it's Vayhi bin So Aaron Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Hashem, Vayafutzu Oivecha, Vayanusu Misanecha Mipanecha. So in English, and when the Aaron, how do you say Aaron in English? When the ark, when the holy ark would travel, Moshe said, God, rise up and let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate you flee from before you. So the Baal HaTurim points out that there are 12 words here. And then the second verse is when we return the Torah to the ark, after a public reading, we read the second one, Vayanuchu Yomar Shuva Hashem Revavot Alpha Yisrael. And when the ark would rest, so he would say, God, return with among the myriads of thousands of Israel. So the Baal HaTurim says this verse has 7 words. So here he points out it's almost like a reverse order. Like in the Sefer Yetzirah, it says, Na'utz sofan b'techilatan b'sofan. The end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning in the end. So the last verse of the Torah has 12 words, and the first verse has 7 words. So the Baal HaTurim took this because we're trying to show that these brackets are a whole book of the Torah. So he says, well, the first verse of the Torah is 7 words, and the last verse of the Torah is 12 words. And that kind of represents the whole Torah, as if it's like one book, even though we call it the Chumash, 5 different books. But ultimately, it's the Torah. It's like one entity. So the Baal HaTurim, but he just reverses it. He puts the 7 words of the first verse is the second verse here. That's what I said. The end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning in the end. And he takes the 12 words of the first verse that we say when we take out the ark, and that's the last verse of the Torah. So again, this is just a brilliant comment from the Baal HaTurim, that he trying to show this idea of these, a total of 19 words are considered a whole book of the Torah. Okay, now we're going to the next chapter, which is chapter 56. And our first one, we have to go a little bit faster here to get everything in. So the first one is on page 548. And it's a very, very short one, but short doesn't mean less meaningful. So as we're going to mention in a minute, if you look in the Art Scroll Chumash, which many people have, if not most people, English speakers, that is, you'll see at the end of every Parsha, David Feinstein makes a comment about how many words in that Torah portion. And he makes a drasha, he makes like a metaphorical, allegorical, metaphorical connection between why are there these many words in this portion. He does it for every portion in the Torah. Just look in the Art Scroll. At the end of every portion, you'll have a comment by Rabbi David Feinstein, the son of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. So this one he didn't give, he gave a different one. The next one will be his comment. But Parshah Yitro is where we receive the Torah. The whole story of Mount Sinai, receiving the 10 Commandments. And it's actually a relatively short Torah portion compared to many, many others. It has exactly 72 verses. And so the idea here is, what's the connection between the giving of the Torah and 72? Well, 72 equals chesed, loving kindness, or just love. And so here, just very simply, the giving of the Torah from God to the Jewish people and ultimately for the whole world is an act of God's chesed. It's like the ultimate chesed. There's a very short but beautiful connection about how many words in a parsha. Now, the next one is also on page 548, and this is the explanation of Rabbi David Feinstein, and that is that Parshah Tetzaveh. Parshah Tetzaveh is in the book of Shemot, Exodus, and this is the second parsha talking about the tabernacle. The first one is Truma. In the portion of Truma, almost all of the physical instruments and dimensions of the tabernacle are given over. And in Parshah Tetzaveh, it concentrates on the clothing of the priests, of the Kohanim, and especially the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And so Rabbi David Feinstein points out that there are 101 verses in this parsha. And he says 101 is the gematria of the name of the angel Michael. Angel Michael. Michael equals 101. So what's the connection? What's the connection between this angel and the 101 verses of this parsha? So he explains that there's this idea that there is what's called the lower Jerusalem, and there's what's called the heavenly Jerusalem. And just like we have a physical tabernacle and we have a physical temple in Jerusalem, we're in the 3 weeks now, and we are trying to connect to the energy of the first 2 temples and the prayer that we will live to see the building of the 3rd temple. The high priest, he's like the key figure. So it's said that in the upper worlds, there's also a Yerushalayim Shel Mala, a heavenly Jerusalem, and there's also a service in the heavenly Jerusalem, and the high priest is the angel Michael. This is how Rabbi David Feinstein connects the 101 verses of Tetzaveh, 101 verses of Tetzaveh with the name Michael. Also a very, very beautiful, beautiful idea. The next one is on 549. And this is from the Bala Turim. And the Bala Turim mentions the menorah is mentioned a number of times in the Torah. And we learn different things each time it's mentioned. The first time that it's mentioned in Parshat Truma, he points out that the root word of menorah appears exactly 7 times. And the menorah is a candelabra of 7 branches. So he points out that this is not a coincidence. And the whole secret of the menorah is, of course, based on 7. So there, the Bala Turim points out in his commentary that the 7 branches of the menorah mentioned 7 times represent very much like the blessing that we learned before that Yitzhak gave to Yaakov. That was the tal of heaven, the dew of heaven, and the fat of the earth. in the grains and the wine. Again, this union of physical and spiritual blessing. Or as it says in Pirkei Avot, im ein lechem, ein Torah. If there's no bread, there's no Torah. Meaning, people can't concentrate. People have to provide a living. If there's no bread, there's no Torah. And then they say also, if there's no Torah, there won't be any bread. So one is dependent on the other. So the Baal HaTurim says that here, there's many, many other explanations. And actually, soon, I'm going to save it, but in just like 6 or 7 chapters, we're going to learn an amazing idea about the menorah and the connection with the number 7. But here, the Baal HaTurim says that there are 7 heavens, and the earth is called by 7 names. And this is in the Masechet, in the tractate of Chagiga. In the tractate of Chagiga, there's a whole discussion about the names of the 7 heavens and what occurs in these 7 heavens, and the 7 names of earth. If anyone wants to look in it, it's in Chagiga 12b, the 12th page, the second part of the page, 12b, in Chagiga is where this whole discussion. And that's what the Baal HaTurim says, that the 7 branches of the menorah, which are mentioned 7 times in the first description of the menorah, represent heaven and earth through the number 7. Okay, the last ones we're going to do have to do with the Shema. And this is on page 550. And this is a very, very interesting one, is that the Shema and the 3 passages that we read after it have a total of 245 words. And the sages, for symbolic reasons that we're going to understand in a minute, for symbolic reasons, they wanted the full recitation of the Shema to contain 248 words. Now, in the Torah, it doesn't include 248 words. It only includes 245. So the sages, they're not adding to the Torah, but we're talking about in prayer that they wanted to add a phrase that would, what's called mashlim, that would complete the 245 words to 248. Why 248? What was so important that there should be 248 words in these passages? So the reason that, one of the reasons is, we're going to give really 2 main reasons here, actually 3, is that there are 248 positive mitzvot and 365 which are called prohibitive, the don'ts, the do nots of the Torah. 365 prohibitive and 248 positive. And so the sages wanted the saying of the Shema to represent in a certain way everything positive about all the mitzvot. But there's a further reason, is because we're told that these 248 positive mitzvot and the 365 prohibitive mitzvot correspond, the 248 to the 248 limbs of the body, and the 365 there's different versions, if it's the sinews or the main blood vessels. And they saw this as important correspondences. And so they wanted the Shema, when we say that you should love God, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, or all your means. So they wanted us to know that, what does it mean with your whole heart, your soul, and your means? It's as if you're putting your whole 248 bones into the saying of the Shema. It should be intense. It should be focused with lots of kavana, lots of kavana. Maybe some of you know that one of the books I wrote is called Shema Yisrael, the cardinal statement of faith in Judaism. 200 meditations. 200 meditations on the Shema, Baruch Shem, and the three passages. Because so many times we say this every day, twice a day, and we get into a rote, and sometimes we don't even know what to think about. So I wrote this book so people would have what to think about when they're saying the Shema. But one of the things is that, again, the correspondence with the 248. So further is 248 is the gematria of Avraham, the first Jew. So by saying the Shema, this is a statement of dedication that takes us all the ways back to Avram Avinu. It's a very, very beautiful way to see it, is that what was Avram's mission, if you get it down to a few words, was to spread the knowledge of one God. There's one God, and that ultimately everything is one. Not just that there's one God, but everything is one. It's the same mission today. So when we say, Hear, O Israel, God, our God, God is one, we should connect it all the ways back to Avram. We're all links in the chain, all the ways back to Avram Avinu. And there's even one more connection, and that is the term B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, is also 248. It's one of the secrets of the name Avraham, that Avram is the archetypal example, epitome of a human being that could reach the level which is called being in the image of God. And so what are these three words that we add? So there's different versions. If one is davening alone, before you say the Shema, you add the words Kel Melech Ne'aman. Kel Melech Ne'aman. The first letters are spelled out Amen. Kel Melech Ne'aman, spelled Amen. And if it's with a congregation, though, it comes at the end. The person leading the prayers will repeat the last three words of the last passage in order to add three words to make it 248. Again, we have the Arizal. So he came and said that even an individual should say the three words at the end, and not necessarily the three words in the beginning, Kel Melech Ne'aman. Again, they're different customs. They're all correct. They're all good. There are no value judgments here. But as everything, there are different opinions of how to make it exactly 248 words. So that is a good place to wrap up our learning tonight. And we should all merit to feel ourselves a link in the chain going all the ways back to Avram Avinu. What a blessing that would be.